Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Fackenthal, or Jeremy, and you're welcome to call me either of those two things. Sorry I can't be with you during week one, but I look forward to meeting you all in person next week. In the meantime, I'm putting together this little video lecture to introduce some concepts and terms for the first week, and then we'll pick up during week two and go over a few of the things that we've covered here and move on to Hinduism during module two. So for this week, you should have a syllabus with you. You should pick that up. If you don't have that, then send me an email and I will get that to you immediately. You can read through the course description at the top of the syllabus, and the gist of that is that we will be studying 7 different religions and then touching on aspects of a couple of other religions. So the major religions that we will study are Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So I don't think I got those quite in the right order that we'll be studying them, but those are the 7. So we'll sort of begin chronologically. So we'll go back to what's considered to be one of the oldest religions in the world, which is Hinduism. We'll talk about how that spread, then how Buddhism developed largely as a reaction to Hinduism. Then we'll move into China and cover Confucianism and Taoism. And then we'll go toward what are typically considered to be the Western religions, or the 3 monotheistic religions, which are Judaism, Christianity, and finally Islam. So we'll be looking at both the history and the beliefs and practices of these religions. We won't be able to go into any great depth on any one of these since we're only spending a week on each religion, but you'll get a pretty good introduction, certainly from the Houston Smith textbook that we'll be using extensively, and then also from extra readings and activities and videos that we'll take a look at in the classroom together. When we study religion, it's good to start with a sort of definition of what we mean by religion in general, especially since some of these things that we call religions that we'll be studying don't seem like religions to a lot of people. So Confucianism and Taoism in particular, at least in their earliest stages, were less about worshiping a god or gods and more about just developing a philosophy or a way of being in the world. So you can look at religion in a couple of different ways, as either particular worship of a god or as more of a sort of a worldview or a way of understanding ultimate reality. I'm going to pop up a couple of slides that show you 1 or 2 or actually 3 ways of defining religion, and these are just sort of standard dictionary definitions of religion. So the belief and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods, or a particular system of faith and worship, or a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance. So some of the things that we will study may in fact fall under that 3rd definition. It's also interesting to note that the origin of the word religion comes from the Latin religio, which means an obligation or a bond or reverence. So you can also think of religion as something that binds us to a particular mode of being in the world, or something to which human beings are bound, which is a sort of different way of thinking about religion, and one that we may have not encountered before. In addition to defining religion, there are a number of other basic terms that we need to come up with definitions for, and this is what I'm going to ask you to do as a part of the Module 1 assignment. So this assignment that should have been handed out to you when you came to class along with the syllabus is just an assignment that will sort of help make up for the missed class time during week 1. So I'm asking you to take a look at these basic terms and either find or come up with your own definitions of each. Some of these you might find in the textbook, some of these you might need to Google or use a dictionary to help you define. And when you define these, I want you to also make sure that you understand the definition, so don't just copy down a textbook or dictionary definition unless you actually understand what the gist of that definition is. So the terms that I'm asking you to define are first the word ecumenical, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Then second, the two terms transcendence and immanence. Then also the terms theistic and then atheistic or non-theistic. And then finally the two terms monotheism and polytheism. So we'll refer back to these terms throughout the class, so it's important to have kind of a working definition or a working understanding of what these basic terms mean as we go forward. There are also a number of different ways that a person can study religions. Obviously, if you are part of a faith community or a church or a synagogue or a mosque, then you probably learn about your own religion from a faith-based perspective. And that is not necessarily what we're doing here. So since this is a college class, we're studying these religions from an academic perspective. So we're not trying to convince anybody that one religion is better than the other. We're not trying to get anyone to believe the basic tenets of any of these religions. Our main goal is to learn about the religions, to learn about why and how they were formed, to learn about what things shaped them as they developed, to learn about how they developed into what they are today, and then about what it is that people believe or practice who are a part of these religions today. So this is called typically the academic study of religion. So it looks at these things from a more objective standpoint than a subjective standpoint. And when I use those two words, subjective means that it would be a viewpoint that includes your own opinions or beliefs, whereas objective tends to be more fact-based or unbiased. So a subjective view is your own sort of biased opinion about something, whereas an objective view is sort of taking a step back and giving it an unbiased assessment of what you consider to be factual information. So in the academic study of religion, we will attempt to take a more objective approach. However, I don't think that any of us can ever sort of just leave our own subjective viewpoints or opinions at the door when we walk into the classroom. So we also just need to be aware of the fact that we all bring our own biases to the study of religion and to whatever it is that we're discussing in the classroom. So it's good to be upfront about those and acknowledge those, and then also to try to, from time to time, take a step back and look at these things from a more unbiased perspective. One way of doing that is also what we call the comparative approach to the study of religion. And just like it sounds, this means that we will be comparing and contrasting multiple religions among different categories or different topics. So we can take a look at both Hinduism and Buddhism and compare and contrast them in terms of their belief in a set of gods and goddesses, or we can compare and contrast them based on their scriptures or sacred texts that they have left us. We can compare and contrast how people sort of escape from whatever the problematic structure of this world is into something better. So there are a number of different ways that we can compare and contrast religions, and even though we'll sort of take a look at these one at a time as we go module to module, and even chapter to chapter in the textbook, each week we'll try to do a little bit of comparison and contrast among whatever religion we're focusing on and those that we've studied in the weeks prior. So that's just a little bit about how we will study religion. And also Houston Smith gives a bit of an approach or an explanation of how he studies religion in the introduction to his book, which is really nicely written, and it kind of gives his own personal reflection on how he came to studying these religions and what he finds fascinating or moving about each of them. So I encourage you to read that and sort of think about or reflect on how he's approaching the study of religion as well. In addition to that, obviously St. Leo is a Catholic university. It may be the case that some of you are Catholic, and it may be the case that none of you are Catholic, and that's totally fine. And we can talk about that all next week when we meet together in person and actually get to know each other. But the Catholic perspective that St. Leo presents is one that seeks to sort of examine and understand the relationship of the Catholic Church to other religions. And so the two extra documents that you'll be reading for Module 1 or for this week are from the Second Vatican Council, and these documents address that specific fact. So how is it that Catholicism or the Catholic Church relates itself to other religions? And I should also say it's important to consider Catholicism and then all of the Christian Protestant denominations and then even the Orthodox Christian Church all together as Christianity. So when we talk about Christianity, we're talking about that wide spectrum of Christian belief structures or churches. So we can't necessarily talk about Catholicism and Christianity because Catholicism is a part of Christianity. However, Catholicism is a particular part of Christianity that is different from other parts of Christianity, and we'll also examine some of the ways that is the case. So these two documents from the Second Vatican Council began to address the way that the Church saw its relationship with other religions, and also with other Christian traditions within the religion of Christianity. The Second Vatican Council was called by Pope John the 23rd in the early 1960s. And so at this point, John the 23rd is fairly old, we can say. So he's getting up there in years. People didn't expect him to live a lot longer. And so he was sort of at the end of his cycle of being pope. Typically people when they become a pope, they are a pope until their death. That wasn't the case with Benedict. He actually decided to retire or step down, and then Pope Francis came in. But with most popes up until that point, they sort of died in the office of pope. And that was the case for John the 23rd. So he started the Second Vatican Council, which was a bit of a surprise because there hadn't really been a church council for a number of years. And church councils in the Catholic Church were just ways of pulling all the major parts of the community, so all the cardinals and bishops together, and thinking through a particular issue or coming to a specific and sort of ultimate decision on an issue or a set of issues. So when we get to Christianity, we'll definitely talk about and look at some of the other church councils that were helpful in shaping early Christian belief. But the Second Vatican Council, and it's just called that because it took place in the Vatican City, and because it was the second council that ever took place in the Vatican City. So the Second Vatican Council was about how the Catholic Church needed to maybe shift or change or accommodate itself to the modern world in some way. So up until the Second Vatican Council, whether you went to a Catholic church in the United States or Ireland or Bolivia or Italy or France, all of the sort of ritual or liturgy of the Mass or of the Catholic worship service was done or recited in Latin. So it may have been the case, and it probably was the case, that the majority of people attending these masses did not speak or understand or read Latin. Since Latin's not a super common language, it's not a common language at all anymore. So part of the Second Vatican Council was redoing the understanding of the liturgy and the Mass itself, and for the first time putting all of that into sort of the common language of the people. So from that point forward, if you attended a Mass in the United States, and it was a largely English-speaking parish, then the Mass would actually be spoken in English so that people could understand what was going on and what it was that they were repeating back to the priest, or what the priest was saying, etc. Likewise, if you went to a Mass in Latin America, then the Mass would be spoken in Spanish. If you went to a Mass in Italy, the Mass would be spoken in Italian, etc. So there were a couple of changes like that in the Second Vatican Council that sort of shifted Catholicism toward the modern era, and made it sort of fit with how people lived their lives, at least at that point in the 1960s. The other major thing that happened was the production of two documents. So one of those is called Nostra Aetate, or In Our Time. The other is Dignitatis Humanae, or the Dignity of Humans. And these two documents sort of spell out the relationship of the Church both to non-Catholics and to non-Christians. And it also changes the way that the Catholic Church views its understanding of salvation. So before this time, and even now to some degree, for the Catholic Church, salvation could only occur sort of through the official offices of the Church. And what that meant is that anyone who was not a part of the Catholic Church would not be seen, at least by the Catholic Church, as being saved or as attaining eternal life, etc. So that position begins to change somewhat with Nostra Aetate, or In Our Time, in that it doesn't necessarily open up the door to everyone and everything, but it does say that there are specific aspects of other religions that are considered helpful, or that may be sort of productive of a worldview that Catholicism could take into its understanding of what it means to achieve salvation. So as you read Nostra Aetate, and this is a fairly short document, it's about 6 pages, you can find it online, and there's a link to it in the syllabus. I'll also email out a link to it, so you can easily click on it. I do want you to read the whole document and then answer a few questions about it that are on the bottom of that Module 1 assignment. So those questions ask you to kind of reflect on the position that the Catholic Church takes with regards to other religions, what examples you can pull out from the text that support that position, and then how does it talk about dialogue and collaboration with other religions. So what's the point of dialogue, or what's the Catholic Church's view on dialogue? Is it positive? Is it negative? Etc. When you're looking at this, I also want you to think about 3 different sort of ways of examining a person's relationship to religions that aren't one's own. So, for instance, if I'm Catholic and I'm thinking about or looking at or talking to someone who is a Hindu, then I could take one of 3 positions. So the first of those positions would be exclusivism, the second is inclusivism, and then the third is pluralism. And on this slide, you'll see some short definitions of each of those. So exclusivism would be that, or one might say that my religion has an exclusive claim to the truth or to ultimate reality or salvation. So you can think of exclusivism as sort of excluding anybody who's not a part of your religion from the ultimate plan or ultimate salvation. Second, inclusivism means my religion has the correct claim to the truth or to ultimate reality and salvation, but people from other religions are included in this plan. So this might mean that a Catholic person would view other religions as maybe not necessarily the correct claim to the truth, but could say that because those religions are also productive of quality human lives that promote human dignity, then those persons could be included in God's plan for salvation. So that's the second possible option of relating to other religions. Then the third option is pluralism, which means that multiple religions could all have the correct claims to their own truths. So this might mean that both Catholicism and Hinduism, each in their own way, have the correct claims to the truth, or their own correct means of understanding ultimate reality and ultimately salvation. So on the slide it says this is not a zero-sum game. So a zero-sum game is when one person is the winner and gets all the points, and the other person is a loser and gets none of the points. So this would be something that would balance that out. So Catholicism or Christianity and Hinduism could be seen on equal footing, and as both having different but equal claims to ultimate reality or religious truth. So as you read and think about Nostra Aetate, one of the questions asks you to consider it in terms of those three ways of evaluating relationships to other religions. So in Nostra Aetate, do you think that the Catholic Church is expressing exclusivism, or are they being inclusivists, or are they becoming pluralists? So see if you can pick out which of those three you think it is, and then kind of defend your answer or say why you think that's the case. Alright, so I mentioned earlier that we will be using this book by Huston Smith. It's called The World's Religions. There are also 3 other books that you should have purchased or should be purchasing for the class. The second is called The World's Wisdom. So this book contains different writings or pieces of sacred texts from each of the religions that we'll study. So starting in Module 2, you'll be reading parts of this book, so we're not going to get through the whole thing, but there are various sections of it that we will be looking at. So during most weeks, you should definitely bring both of these books to class with you, because a lot of the things from this reading we want to take a look at together when we're in the classroom. So we'll discuss this either in a large group or in small groups and kind of see if we can make sense of the meaning of some of these more difficult texts. The last 2 books that you are buying are, first, a book called Confucius Lives Next Door, and then second, a book called Children of Dust. So these are the 2 books that you'll be reading on your own and writing 4 or 5 page book reports on. So it's important that you have these, and I would encourage you to get started on these sooner rather than later, so don't wait until the night before the report is due to sit down and start reading the book. They're pretty interesting. The second one is a little bit longer, but they're both interesting in that there are sort of biographical accounts of people who either were a part of that particular religion or sort of witnessed firsthand or lived in a culture that was a part of that particular religion. So Confucius Lives Next Door is obviously about Confucianism. Children of Dust is about the experience of a young Muslim boy who grows up in a fairly conservative or fundamentalist Islamic background, and then his experience of moving to the U.S., sort of leaving Islam for a while and then going back to Islam, and then finding it as a beautiful, more tolerant religion than what he'd grown up with. I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit more about this book, the Huston Smith book. You'll be reading Chapter 1, which is called His Point of Departure, for Week 1. And then starting in Week 2, or Module 2, we'll pick up with Chapter 2, which begins with Hinduism, and then kind of go through there throughout the book. So Point of Departure, or his introduction, begins to talk about what this book is and what this book is not, which means that in essence he's giving us his sense for how to study religion, or he's giving us the way that he in fact studies or looks at religions. And we'll start with this quote that's on page 2. He says, "All we can do is try to listen carefully and with full attention to each voice in turn as it addresses the divine. So if our goal as scholars of religion or people who are studying religion is to just try to listen carefully and with full attention, that means that there are some things that we are doing and some things that we are not doing. So what we are doing is listening and trying to understand or comprehend or get a clearer picture or viewpoint of these religions. What we're not doing is trying to assign value judgments to the religions. So if we're listening with full attention to each voice, then we're not coming with sort of a set of predetermined assumptions about which religions are good and which religions are bad. We're also not trying to assess at the end which religions are good or which religions are bad, but trying to look at each of them and pull out the way that they address the divine or understand the divine or understand ultimate reality, and then to see how that functions in the lives of those people who practice that religion and how it might compare to other religions. So he goes on to say, first of all, that this is not a textbook of history. So Smith is not necessarily giving you a complete historical picture from beginning to the present of the important events in each of these religions and how they progressed historically. There are other books that do that, and he just simply doesn't have time to give you all of that historical detail in this one little book. Second, he admits that he can't give a completely well-rounded view of each religion. He says that there's just simply too much to cover, so there are certainly some things that he has had to leave out. So we'll try, when we get to each religion, to see if we can pick up on what things might have been left out, and I'll bring in some other resources and some other things to the classroom that can help us maybe get that full picture. But again, we won't be able to cover everything given our time constraints as well. Then he says he also cannot pretend to give a balanced account of religions, since this would include a bunch of stuff that not all people adhere to. So what he means by that is that he can't give a balanced account of each of these religions, because to do so would be to present a lot of stuff on each religion that only sort of small groups actually believe within that religion. So there might be a group of Taoists who follow today one particular god and think that giving offerings to that god is what's going to give them immortality. And he's not going to focus on just that particular belief, because if you were to do that, you would have to focus on all of those particular beliefs, and it would simply take too much time. Then he says this is not a book comparing religions in terms of their worth. So like we said earlier, we're not necessarily making value judgments about which one is better or worse. We're just comparing them across the board. But he does say that this is a book about values, and by that he means that it's a book about where people come up with value, or how people assign value, or what is valuable within people's lives across this religious spectrum. He also says it is a book that seeks to embrace the world. It is a book that takes religion seriously. So he believes that religion functions in powerful and significant ways within people's lives, and so he wants to take it seriously. And then finally, it's a book that makes a real effort to communicate. So he's trying to communicate to us as the reader his own experience, or the things that he has sort of taken in or seen or heard about each of these religions. And I'll end with this quote of his from page 8, where he says, "The only thing that is unqualifiedly good is extended vision, the enlargement of one's understanding of the ultimate nature of things." So as you read this first chapter, I want you to try to see if you can come up with some idea or understanding of what he means by extended vision. So what is he talking about there, and why is that the only thing that is, according to him, unqualifiedly good? So good without any qualifications on it. It just is good. All right. So that's about it for Module 1. When we get together next week, we'll go over parts of Nostra Aetate and sort of pull out or discuss the answers that you provided to the questions that are in the Module 1 assignment. We'll also go back and quickly talk about ecumenism and what that means, particularly as it pertains to the Catholic Church. And then we will dive right into Hinduism because there's a lot to cover there. So I look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday, and good luck. Feel free to email me if you have any questions about the assignment or the readings or any of the other assignments in the class. And we will go through the syllabus in a bit more detail when we're together next week as well. So don't worry about or stress about the details of all that yet. I'll give you all the information that you need in advance of each of the assignments that are due. All right, thanks.